something that recently happened that we talked a little bit about yesterday was this interview with Robert Malone on YouTube, which has been taken down, seemingly completely removed across all of YouTube. And of course, like I said, this took place on the Joe Rogan Experience. He had on Dr. Robert Malone, a controversial physician who was credited as one of the many creators, or people that helped create the mRNA vaccine. And Zach and I have made fairly clear on our show that we are pro-vaccine. That's just our personal stance. But I still think that people should be able to discuss what they want to online in a non-censored way. And I think that this kind of censorship of people and voices is only going to make the problem worse, only going to increase this paranoia among percentages of the population that feel this way. So regardless of whatever you think about the specifics of the issue or the medicine and the vaccine, etc., what do you think the proper response is to the spreading of information and the profiting off of misinformation potentially? And what role do you see these big tech companies like YouTube or Twitter in controlling this? Or do you think they should just take a totally hands-off approach?
Well, I've always had the literal exact same stance, regardless of the topic, regardless of the players involved, regardless of their intentions. I think the only time social media platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, whatever, should censor anything is if someone is in violation of a free speech law in the United States. We have free speech laws. We've had them for quite a long time. Like, they're there. We just need to say, okay, you follow them in this digital space. To me, that is the most obvious solution to all these back and forths about like should they censor this? Should they censor that? What about this misinformation? What about this? We've had, yellow journalism and misinformation in the American landscape forever. It has always existed. You can go and you can look at old newspapers from back in the day. People would publish all kinds of absurd things. Just remember the tabloid sections when we were growing up and stuff like that. So yeah, I just think there's no reason to censor anybody unless they violated a free speech law in the United States, regardless about how I personally feel about what they have to say. And if I disagree with what they have to say, then, I have the option to try to put out better speech or to try to put out, my take on it, and I'm in the same camp with you guys. I'm fully vaccinated plus the booster, but I don't think unless a free speech law was violated, which it certainly doesn't sound like it was, I don't see why you would take down anything. There's no reason for it. There's no reason why the executives at Google or Facebook or Twitter should decide what is and isn't free speech or what is and isn't news. They have no qualifications to be doing so. They never did. And the real solution for a lot of this, when people are like, oh, well, people are drawn to these extreme things because of Facebook and because of that, the real situation for all this, the real solution for all this is better data privacy. And there's only a few people who will actually say this, because what Facebook does and what they have always done and what they will always do is try to keep you on Facebook. They want to keep you on it. So if you're kind of right wing or whatever, they'll keep feeding you right wing stuff. They'll keep feeding you stuff. If you're kind of left wing, they'll keep feeding you left wing stuff. At least that falls into their barometer of approval. And that's what they do to keep you on Facebook. And meanwhile, they harvest your data and they get as much information about you as they can so they can sell it. That's how they really make their money. So the solution to all this, the solution to like, oh, so-and-so's getting so extreme because of data privacy laws. First of all, it's the right thing to do because they shouldn't be surveilling us anyway. And second of all, it makes their stupid algorithm not work anymore. But no one brings that up except for some digital rights organizations that actually know what they're talking about. Why doesn't anyone in power bring that up? Because that would actually hurt Mark Zuckerberg's pocketbook. So they don't want to bring that up because that'll hurt his pocketbook. And he spends a lot of lobbying money. So instead, you have people like Liz Warren or whoever else get on there when the cameras are on and they give a really nice speech about how Facebook should censor more, which is the totally wrong solution. The right solution is better data privacy laws, but they won't go there because it hurts their pocketbooks.
I had not heard. I never really thought about that, but that is a damn fucking good point. And obviously, from a ethical perspective, I've always been pro data rights. But this is kind of that's a nice feather in the cap to consider when you're making an argument. It's like, hey, you might not care about privacy. You might, like, I remember I got into this huge argument in college one time with our entire lecture hall, basically, because they were all like, well, if you're not a criminal, then why do you care if the government spies on you? I was like, are you this like dumb? Like, I was literally on my own island. And it's just so baffling to me that some people just have massive groupthink. They're like, I want to be kept safe. I want to, security cameras. I don't steal. So what's the problem with that? Like, okay, you guys need, but this is another kind of weapon, another tool, in convincing people, hey, we can reform these things in a twofold fashion and get an outcome that we're all comfortable with, right? We're all on board with the First Amendment, at least I think so, right? I mean, as you mentioned, Ron, it's been around since 1776. I think we've put up with it for some time. And if somebody is seriously causing harm, we have ways of taking them to fucking court and making them be punished, right? Alex Jones is the perfect example. We didn't have to kick Alex Jones off of YouTube and force all of his audience onto the even more remote, isolated parts of the internet to get his commentary. The laws we had in place were enough to hold him accountable. The Sandy Hook victims took him to court.
Right.
They won. A jury of their peers said, you violated the law when you spread this misinformation. You lied about these people. You smeared them, etc. In a way that a court of law finds you guilty of. Now you have to, X, Y, and Z as your punishment.
That's a really interesting case to bring up, because the thing with the whole Alex Jones thing, the social media platforms decided to be trial, jury, and executioner before he was given that day in court. And a lot of us were sitting there and being like, look, if he's guilty of violating free speech laws, which he might be, like I was like, but that's not for me as an individual to decide. That needs to be decided in court. I don't watch the guy's show. I don't know what all he was saying, and I'm not going to start. But he needs to have like a fair shake where they need to decide that yes, this was defamation. A court of law ruled that yes, it was, but he was taken off of everything before that decision. That's backwards. It shouldn't work that way. If someone's found in violation of breaking a free speech law, I'm okay with them getting kicked off of a social media platform. They violated a free speech law and they were found guilty by a court of law. But, again, I don't like the idea of these big tech platforms just getting to be trial, jury, and executioner.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things because it's like, you can go to court and you can lose your ability to, practice law in America, right? Get disbarred. And there's all kinds of fucked up ways that they can disbar you for things that you would be surprised. Like if you file for bankruptcy because you're poor, you can't be a lawyer, all kinds of shit. But they have ways to keep you from practicing law. I would be on board with, like you mentioned, Ron, if Alex Jones has now been found guilty in a court of law, he's, prohibited from having a, broadcast, kind of like we used to have, what was the FCC or the federal broadcast or whatever the fuck.
Well, we still have the FCC. That's still a thing. It's still a deadlock right now, but that's a whole different issue.
Either way, but it's also kind of the other side of that coin that I'm sympathetic to, and just to hear your thoughts on it is, I can go be found guilty of, any number of free speech crimes in America, but I don't lose my ability to grab a megaphone, stand on the corner of, 9th and Broadway and scream what, ever I think to people. Right. So it is kind of difficult if you were going to establish, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter as a public domain. How do we distinguish between your right to speak and your right to publish? You know what I mean?
Oh, totally, man. And this is just, we are in an interesting situation where technology, the law has not caught up with technology. And, the solution that I think we need to push for is an actual digital Bill of Rights, which I know that's a pretty heavy ask considering we haven't even mastered the regular Bill of Rights first. Which I get, but I do think that, the time is now because we are living in this global village and the pandemic especially has made that so apparent. we should have a digital bill of rights that addresses this stuff. And we need to incorporate, the laws that we already have. We already have free speech laws. And my personal take, our free speech laws are pretty solid. Are they perfect? Of course not. I don't think when you're trying to tackle such a heavy concept like that, you're not going to get it perfect. I don't think we've gotten it perfectly. I don't think any other country has either. But I think the free speech laws of the United States are pretty good. That's one area where I actually think
It's like the one thing we did right.
Yeah, right. Like it's like usually we're setting the worst of examples, but I think our free speech laws are actually pretty solid. Now, full disclaimer, I don't know as much about the free speech laws in a place like England or Canada. Like I'm not super familiar with them, so I can't really speak on them. But I think ours are pretty solid based on what I do know about them. And I think that we need to take that, apply it to the digital space, and kind of have policies that meet these moments. And I also think a digital bill of rights should include things like net neutrality, for example. It should address the digital divide and have municipal broadband all over the country. So I think that's one of the things we should be shooting for. I know it's a tall glass of water. I know it's a big ask, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also, just on the Robert Malone anti-vax front, I think that a huge problem that the advocates of censorship miss is that this kind of behavior just empowers the fraction of the population that feels this way in the first place. It only increases their paranoia about the government overreach and the sense and this forced narrative that they feel is being forced upon them. And it's almost like the Streisand effect. It's like, oh, don't look over here. Like, don't look at this thing. Don't you listen to these people talk. And then people are like, I wonder, what they're trying to hide. I wonder why they don't want me to listen to that or look over there. And then, people that are vulnerable to misinformation, people that maybe don't have the privilege of having a relationship with a doctor or medical professional because they don't have enough money to go to the doctor. Those people are, primarily going to fall victim to that misinformation and are going to suffer the consequences of it, which is just so unfortunate because ignorance isn't it shouldn't be a death sentence, right? Just because you don't have the access to the right information or because you can't afford to talk with a doctor or someone that really knows what they're talking about when it comes to this stuff, doesn't mean that you deserve to die. But unfortunately that is the case for some of these people who again, they're not bad people, but they've just been led astray by the algorithm on Facebook or again by their lack of an ability to speak with someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And the next thing they know, they find themselves more vulnerable to this pandemic and to the different variants, and they're going to suffer the most. So, it's really unfortunate from all of those angles. And again, I just don't think the censorship is the right way to counter this problem. It's only going to exacerbate the paranoia.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that. And what was, and maybe there hasn't been one. But I'm curious if you guys know, what was the official reasoning that any platform gave for taking it down? Like what did they say? I mean, I haven't seen the interview. Okay, like that was just it, just a blanket, like, okay, and this is okay. I mean, I haven't seen the interview,
but I mean, it's crazy. I mean, just to not to cut in on it, there's definitely been a concerted wave of new strikes being brought out. I don't think it's wrong to say that recently, big tech has done it kind of seems like it comes in waves. Everybody gets a strike. Everybody from like Primo Radical got a strike this morning. Lance from the Surfs got a strike. Like that's a very wide range of left YouTube, right? Hassan got a strike, got a ban. All those kinds of.
Wasn't it like he said crack?
Yeah, that was
something.
Yeah,
okay. That's a little all right. I don't know. I don't follow this stuff all that closely, to be honest with you guys. But
no, I understand. But just to make the point that that this now you see like okay, it's easy to go after a small channel. Certainly a channel the size of the Vanguard or slightly larger, right? Nobody's gonna fuck it. There's not gonna be any outcry if we get struck down one day. But there is gonna be a lot of outcry if you strike down. Joe Rogan averages 11 million listens per podcast episode. That's going to, so they clearly feel empowered, which is one of the interesting takeaways that I feel, we're looking at now. And I wonder, yeah, I don't know. I just wonder where that leads us. Probably nowhere good.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Zach. And I think that's the other big problem with this move, which is not just, of course, as I mentioned, it's going to only empower these sections of the population and increase their paranoia, but it's also just going to set this precedent, which we all know they've been yearning to set and technically already have set, but now they're only furthering it, which is that they could just willy-nilly block whoever the fuck they want on the basis of literally nothing. And I did look into it, Ron, just because you were asking. According to this article on The Independent, there wasn't even a reason given. They just straight up took it off. So if you click on the link now, it just says it violated the platform's community guidelines, and there was not even a reason given. So again, without, I don't want to come off as if I'm defending Dr. Robert Malone. I think a lot of this stuff is quite irresponsible and pretty despicable, to be frank. But you can't just ban someone with no reasoning, with no rationale or warning, and then turn around and expect everyone to just take it. Of course, that's going to be turned around and weaponized against smaller channels that are actually speaking truth to power, channels that are speaking up in favor of Palestine, for example, stuff like that they're going to just sweep under this rug with the same large broom. And that's just really scary. And obviously, as someone who makes their living talking shit on the internet about politics, and sometimes with a controversial perspective, Zach and I don't always come to the same conclusion that the mainstream media does. So I don't want to find ourselves in a place where anyone that's not reaching the same conclusion as the mainstream media and journalists are, that you're subject to banning, or that you're under that thumb. That's pretty terrifying to me.
Well, I think that I kind of see history repeating itself a little bit here. And what I mean by that is, again, we could go back to like the mid to late 90s here, the same time that Ron was listening to the Wu-Tang cassettes. There was some other stuff going on where people like Marilyn Manson were getting blamed for all the ills in the world. All the school shootings were Marilyn Manson's fault. It wasn't the fault of a country that had no weapons policies whatsoever. It wasn't the fault of a country that was letting neoliberalism rear its head in such an ugly way that you're having these kids that just felt neglected in every way imaginable. It was Marilyn Manson's fault, and it was his music's fault. I'm kind of seeing a little bit of that here. Now, I don't watch Joe Rogan's show. I mean, I've listened to some segments here and there over the years, but I don't tune in regularly. But I see a bit of this happening again. And look, I think that there are some people who would take medical advice from Joe Rogan, and quite frankly, that is terrifying.
There are massive numbers of people that will tweet, I trust Joe Rogan more than X medical professional.
And that's frightening, but
that's fine though, right? I'm not saying that those people should all be like, they have the right to. I'm just letting you know that is a very large pool of people that feel like they can. And what does that say about our society and all of that? People feel like they can trust Joe Rogan more than an actual medical professional.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. Look, maybe you like Joe Rogan's content, maybe you don't. It's not really all that relevant. But the point here, like when you kind of liken it to scapegoating, which is what this is at the end of the day. It's not Joe Rogan's fault that we don't have universal health care. So you have so many people who weren't even able to have a conversation with the doctor or any doctor. It's not Joe Rogan's fault that as a society, we have failed on every level. The testing crisis that we have in this country is not Joe Rogan's fault. That's a failure of leadership. And by the way, other places in the world, they figured it out very easy. There's people in England right now. They're sharing pictures on social media. They have boxes of freaking COVID tests at their house. Here in the United States, good luck finding one in general. And we need testing. That's a big tool to help us through this that we have been failing on nonstop. The only reason we're even talking about it is because Jen Psaki stepped in it during a freaking we weren't even talking about it before then. And then she just goes, which how freaking tone deaf can you get? Like, what should we do? Just send one to every American? Yes, Jen.
Yes.
That's what they do all over the freaking world in every other industrialized country. That's what they've been doing. And they're either free or they cost about $1 because they cost about 80 cents to make. Here in the United States, everything's profit, baby. So they cost like $25. All that is not Joe Rogan's fault or any other person's fault. Like, that is the fault of a failure of leadership. It's not Joe Rogan's fault that the CDC has decided you could just go back to work. Just go back to work. 5 days, just go back to work. And they're not even They're saying the quiet part out loud now. They don't give a shit. I mean, Fauci's just saying, yeah, we don't want to shut down the economy. We don't want to hurt the economy. So go back to work. And I seem to remember about a year ago, or 18 months ago, even, there were people who saying, there's a lot of people who criticize someone like Fauci for the wrong reasons. But Fauci, the biggest criticism that he is worthy of is that he is a capitalist first,
Yep.
and public health comes in a distant second at best. A
Right.
lot of people were saying that a year ago. Subtly raised his
Right.
hand. And a lot of people looked at us like we had freaking lobsters crawling out of our ears. Turns out we were freaking right. And it's not just Fauci working alone. He's just the figurehead of a total system. And to have that guy's job for as many years as he's had it, you have to bow at the altar of capitalism first and public health as an afterthought. That's the United States. That's why we can't handle a pandemic at all. Right. I'm not saying anywhere else in the world has mastered it, but holy shit, have we set the bar for failing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're 100% right, Ron, about the capitalist system being really at fault here, not some scapegoat commentator who's spreading misinformation. But yeah, if we didn't have such a rigidly hyper-capitalist healthcare and medical system, then people's fears and paranoia about this vaccine and about the medical system in general would massively be assuaged, because even if you are pro-vax, as I am, there's still no denying that our healthcare and medicine system is centered around profit, and it shouldn't be that way. And of course, as long as that is the case, people are always going to be able to accurately point out, well, they're just trying to make money. So how can you really trust what they're doing? We've seen, the pharmaceutical companies flood communities with opioids, for example, just to make a buck, poison entire, communities of people for profit. So it's really not like, it's unheard of for something like that to happen. And of course, people are going to remember that. People are going to, always be thinking about that in instances like this, where it is important for everyone to, hopefully get on the same page and do their civic duty in that sense. But yeah, if we didn't have this, hyper-capitalist predatory system, then I don't think there would be this much paranoia. I don't think there would be, this many people that are, so afraid and so hesitant about this new drug. Because again, they wouldn't think of medicine as some way for, giant corporations to make money off of them. They would think of it as a public health measure, a public good.